This video is a rapid recap of vegetative propagation geared towards the Leaving Cert Biology course in Ireland, so it's the basics only. So what is vegetative propagation? It's asexual reproduction in plants. It's reproduction that involves one parent plant only. There are no gametes involved, no seeds involved or produced. So there is no meiosis involved in the process of vegetative propagation, only mitosis. This is the only form of nuclear division, and mitosis produces genetic clones. There will be no genetic variation introduced in the offspring the plants produced. Vegetative propagation is a common natural process. It involves specific parts of a parent plant that become separated and give rise to new individual plants. Vegetative propagation can involve the stem, the root, the leaf and the bud, and we have to give examples of each and a brief explanation as to how this happens. So let's start with the stem and runner shoots, typically associated with the strawberry plant. The strawberry plant develops these runner shoots, horizontal stems that grow above the soil but run along the ground. So a bud on the runner shoot will eventually give rise to a new plant by forming roots and shoots. This new plant can then separate from the parent plant, but it too will eventually develop runner shoots, giving rise to more plants. Some plants can form stem tubers. These are underground stems which become swollen with food at the tip, so in this way they're used to store food. However, when you look at the formation of the potato, this stem tuber, it has all the attributes or all the features of a stem, and when you look at the potato and see the eyes, the axillary or lateral buds, these can give rise to new branches. When you look at the potato, just make sure you can identify some of the features that you would find on a stem as being on the potato also. For example, those apertures for gas exchange, those lenticels, you'll see those, lots of those on the diagram there. And then you'll also be able to pick out leaf scars, these sort of semicircular scars on the potato where there once was a scale leaf. Some plants can form root tubers. This is when swollen fibrous roots form at the base of the stem, and each one of these fibrous roots has formed from an axillary bud at the base of the stem. So the main plant will die away, and these swollen roots with this associated axillary bud can give rise and grow into a brand new plant. Examples of plants that form root tubers are sweet potatoes and the dahlia plant. Next example is the bud, and it's really the onion bulb. It's a modified bud. So when you look inside the onion bulb, you'll see there's a stem, a reduced stem, there's an apical bud, there are axillary or lateral buds, and there's these swollen fleshy leaves that store food, and there's also the roots. In spring, the new plant develops from the apical bud, and it will photosynthesize and send food down to the axillary or lateral buds, and these can become new bulbs, which will do the same the following spring. Daffodils are an example of another plant that will form bulbs. So the final example of natural vegetative propagation involves the leaf. Some plants, like the calico plant, are commonly known as the mother of thousands. It produces tiny little plantlets around the edge of the leaves. You can see them here in the film. And these little plantlets can drop off or be removed and planted into their own soil, giving rise to new mature plants. So that was vegetative propagation, natural methods whereby parts of the plant are modified to carry out vegetative propagation, such as the stem, the root, the bud and the leaf. But there are artificial ways of bringing about vegetative propagation, and you have to know a little of each of these particular examples. One of the most common ways of carrying out vegetative propagation artificially is by taking plant cuttings. So in this plant we're taking a cutting from the stem. So you cut your piece of stem, and the cut part, the part that you're taking, gets dipped often in rooting powder, and the rooting powder will contain plant growth regulators which will stimulate roots to grow. So you place your cutting into rooting powder and then you plant it in its own soil, and if conditions are favourable it will grow into its own individual mature plant. The next method is layering, and there are many ways to do this, but one common way, an easy way, is to take a shoot still attached to the parent plant and bend it with a sharp U-bend, pinning it underneath the ground and just leaving the tip above the soil. In some cases, the gardener will cut the stem where it's beneath the ground just before it's buried with a knife, making a small nick or wound. And this wounded area promotes the transportation of auxins down from the tip of the plant to that area, and this stimulates the formation of roots. When the new plant is established, it can be separated from the parent plant. Next up, it's grafting. Grafting is done when you want to combine beneficial traits of two different plants. For example, you could have one plant with good fruit. It produces good fruit, but not much of it because of a poor root system. You can take a branch of this tree and graft it onto a tree with a better root system. Ultimately, this will give you a plant that produces lots of your desired fruit because it's benefiting from a better root system. So the final method of vegetative propagation, artificial vegetative propagation, is tissue culturing or micropropagation of plants, producing many plants from a small piece of plant tissue. So the process involves removing a sample of plant tissue, ensuring that it's sterile and transferring it into sterile growth medium, which is enhanced with nutrients. Maintaining sterile conditions is so important because you don't want to introduce pathogens. Eventually, a callus will form, which is a mass of undifferentiated cells. The callus is then treated with different concentrations of growth regulators to stimulate the formation of roots and shoots, and eventually you end up with many identical plantlets. So an important part of this chapter is to know the pros and cons of vegetative propagation. What are the benefits and what are the disadvantages to this over-sexual reproduction? Let's start with the pros. Vegetative propagation produces genetic clones. All of the offspring those plants produce from the parent plant are genetically identical, and this is really important because this preserves desired traits. For example, if you're a commercial grower and you've a particular brand of apple that tastes a certain way or looks a certain way, you want to maintain those traits. And so asexual reproduction, vegetative propagation of those apple trees will do that. It's generally considered a faster process because there's no reliance on external agents such as pollinators, and because there is no seeds, it's considered to be a more reliable process, resulting in more often than not a successful new plant being formed. So now let's look at the cons to vegetative propagation, some of the disadvantages or considered disadvantages. The major feature of vegetative propagation is the production of genetically identical plants, genetic clones. However, sometimes this can have a disadvantage as well, because if environmental conditions changed and if there was, for example, the introduction of a plant disease, if one of the plants succumbed to it, all of them would. Vegetative propagation does not produce seeds, therefore the lack of a seed bank is a disadvantage. Also, vegetative propagation produces many plants very close together, which can lead to overcrowding and competition. So that was vegetative propagation. At this stage, very close to the Leaving Cert, I would say give yourself the gift of plants. Learn these topics because some of them, if not all of them, will appear on your paper or the associated practicals, so please revise them. So you know yourself, you have your textbook, there's lots of other free resources out there. The very best of luck.